This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to be joined by a legend of book writing and criticism, Nat Segaloff. Thank you for joining me, Nat.
Well, thank you. The legend is quite a word I've never heard before. I've heard others, believe me, but never a legend. Thank you.
I've read your book on Arthur Penn, and recently I had the opportunity of reading your book, Hurricane Billy, the biography of William Friedkin. And this is a reissued book, right? This is a book that you wrote in the early 90s?
It came out in 1990. My joke is that it was originally published as a remainder. Because the publisher, and I say this in the republishing, in a foreword to the republishing, the publisher, now all authors complaining that their book was never promoted, but mine was actively killed, and it didn't do Billy Friedkin or me any good. But it's taken this long for me to realize that used copies were going on the internet for hundreds of dollars, and I wanted some of that. So I arranged with Bear Manor Media, which is a print-on-demand publisher, to bring out a new version of it with a foreword and especially an afterword about Billy's later films and his death. It isn't a complete update of his career, but it does bring the book back into print after 35 years.
And it's a great book. It's a really I think it really benefits from the fact that it's written at that stage in his career as well, because that was feels like he's gone through his most significant work. And although there are some great films to come, you get him kind of at all those major questions that people have about his work.
It was written between 1988 and it came out in 1990. So let's figure 88 and 89, a time when Billy was in poo. He really was. He had had several collapses, the most significant of which was Sorcerer, which lost a ton of money for both Universal and Paramount, and was directing TV movies. And although he told me he would be happy to direct TV movies forever, I thought that wasn't the case. And I know that he knew that I thought it wasn't the case. And he was incredibly open to talking with me. Mind you, we already had a relationship from the days of The Exorcist on. Billy never lied to me. He fooled around a lot, but he never told me anything that I found was false. And I think it's a very frank book, very open book, and it stands the test of time.
I think it was really interesting that right towards the end of the book, you know, right at the close of the book, in fact, you use the word Billy for the first time. You know, previously it's William Friedkin, and you only use Billy if somebody else is, you're directly quoting someone else. And that had a, you know, there was an affection that you could feel through the book without ever compromising the objectivity that you had about some of his behavior and some of his filmmaking.
I wish I'd been smart enough, like you've just noticed, to have a dichotomy between Billy on the record and off the record. But in fact, it was my first book and I didn't have the scholarly regimen down yet. So I called him Friedkin because isn't that what scholars do?
I'm not sure if I would put myself in that category, but yeah, there are certain behaviors that are assumed, let's say. Before we get really into Friedkin, why don't we talk a little bit about your career? Where did you start writing about film? I mean, you said you were working in a cinema when you first came into contact with Billy Friedkin. So could you tell us a little bit more about your background there?
My life is one of multitasking. I, of course, like everybody in my generation of the 60s, went to film school and thought I would get a job in Hollywood right after that. Disabused of that, I got a job doing publicity for film companies, working with agencies in Boston, Massachusetts, and eventually heading the publicity department of their city's major theater chain, like the Odeon Circuit would be in England, for example. And it was under that capacity that I had contact with William Friedkin, because when The Exorcist opened in only a handful of theaters in America, my job was to stand outside the screening facility, which was a theater where we were showing the critics the film the day before opening. Friedkin had given us permission to show The Exorcist the day before it opened. And the day before opening was Christmas Day. So all the critics turned up on Christmas. And, oh, they lamented so much having to be away from their families. But my job was to stand outside the door and make sure that the audience members didn't get in for what they thought was the regular commercial show. And then shortly after that, my fellow management people and I were indicted by the state of Massachusetts for blasphemy, obscenity, and corrupting the morals of a minor. It turns out that a religious nut, a woman, had brought her underage daughter to see the movie and then sued us for essentially what she had done to the child. Well, Billy called me. I hardly knew him. I mean, I'd sent him a note saying, maybe you should know this. He was in Warner Brothers in California, 3,000 miles away at the time. And he called me and said, Nat, you got to stop these people. You got to fight this. Count on me for support. And that's how I came to meet Billy Friedkin. We got together several times over the intervening years when I became a critic and a TV producer in Boston, having left publicity. And in 1988, I picked up the phone and said, hey, Billy, can I write your life story? He said, sure. That was our contract. It wasn't even a physical handshake. It was on the phone. So I've now condensed 20 years into a minute and 25 seconds.
Let's just go back a little bit further then and say, the idea of going to film school, the idea of working in cinema and loving films. What were your first inklings of that? What were the films which first inspired that love?
Film was the language of my generation. I was
Mm.
the so-called new Hollywood generation. And so it was the usual ones like Citizen Kane and Breathless, uh, 400 Blows, which I was able to find either in repertory theaters or in film school. But we're talking the late 1950s and early 60s, which was before video. And so if you wanted to see a movie, you had to either stay up late on television to watch it before the station signed off at one. That's what they did then. Or you would catch it at a repertory theater. I was growing up in Washington, D.C., and so we at least had a couple of repertory theaters. And let me tell you, when you see a double feature of Grand Hotel and Dinner at Eight on a 50-foot wide screen, you fall in love with the movies. In my case, I was set in front of the television when I was about 8 years old. My mother said, I think you ought to see this movie. It was a local broadcast of Casablanca. And I never stopped thanking her for that. On the other hand, my father said, hey, there's a late night movie on tonight. You really ought to see it. And he set me there and he went to bed for a late night movie. And the late night movie was The Thing. So I got my first taste of horror films early on, too. I was very lucky. I was raised in an environment that allowed motion pictures. And even though I obsessed and tried making with my own 8 millimeter cameras and worked with friends and, animated a clay dinosaur like every kid of my generation did, it wasn't until I was able to go away to film school at Boston University when I realized that other people had these same interests. And nothing helps a kid focus his reputation and his interest more than finding that it's shared. And I was very lucky for my generation. Again, this is before video. We had to look for movies in theaters, and I was lucky to go to a large enough city that had repertory theaters, and it had people who wanted to see them.
I always remember that, I mean, video came in about halfway through my childhood. I think we were about 12 and 13. So I was already starting to watch films and starting to be aware that I wanted to go and see films that weren't available to me. And it was only when I went to Liverpool as a sort of teenager that there was a possibility of seeing perhaps films that weren't on the normal circuit. It would be great if there were that sort of repertory was more widespread. I mean, it's not really something that you find sort of in the provinces anymore. It's something that you'll find in Paris and Amsterdam and New York, but outside of those huge cities, you're not really going to get it.
Nor in America. The art
Mm.
film craze was burned out really in the late 90s when the big film companies started realizing that there was money in the art films and they started buying the Miramaxes and the Focus Features and all of the independent companies and killed them. Partly
Mm.
for competition and partly because you can't use those large draconian advertising techniques to sell a movie that's going to appeal to maybe 12 theaters in the country. And that was a huge problem. It still is a problem. Now, of course, with the mechanized films, the so-called tent poles and blockbusters and franchises, the independent cinema is practically dead.
Absolutely. So when you're watching these films coming into the 60s and 70s, and you're watching contemporary movies coming out, movies by Francis Ford Coppola, movies by Friedkin et al. Cassavetes is coming out now. You know, I always think of sometimes there are moments in your life where you think, oh, I'm lucky to be alive when, you know. this record, this piece of music comes out. Personally, I remember watching Ronaldo and Lionel Messi play football and thinking, oh, I'm so lucky to be alive in this era where the two best footballers who have ever played are actually playing in the same league against each other. Um,
That's you're right. You're right. You can take these things for granted if you want, but when it's shared by other people, you really do feel a collective excitement. You say, Fellini Satyricon is coming out. Let's get in line and watch it. I remember talking to Jonathan Demme, who started off as a studio publicist, and he said all the publicists would know when the films were coming out. We'd know first. And so we knew when there was a new Godard or there was a new Truffaut or a new whatever. And we would be eagerly waiting for these. And we would set up screenings ourselves and watch them. Privileged or not, that was the excitement. And then you would wait and see what Pauline Kael thought of it. Fortunately, I didn't read her that much. Was never a fan. But at least you had people and you had critics being interested. And it was the last time the directors were allowed to be auteurs. It took the film companies a long, long time to keep directors from being recognized. And they've accomplished their job. Now no one knows who directs movies. I mean, I'm
yeah,
being draconian in my statement, but that's pretty much the case.
yeah, there are sort of a few exceptions, but very few. Let's face it, not in the league that there used to be. Where I mean, nowadays you can watch people like Dick Cavett on YouTube, and you can see him interviewing Ingmar Bergman and Jean-Luc Godard on a national
Hmm.
chat show, and it's just like I can't think that Jimmy Kimmel is gonna have yeah, I don't know, maybe Jimmy Kimmel will, but I can't imagine they'll have the
Well, maybe
latest
Tarantino,
French.
but only.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, you would never find this. You would never find this at all. You'd find maybe the press conference at Cannes, and that, but they also don't have authors on late night television. So this affects you and me, I think, more more than it would a late night director.
absolutely, absolutely. There's no equivalent of sort of Gore Vidal and Norman Mailer and all those people who you used to see on the circuit, who not only
Yes.
wrote brilliant books but had the gift of the gab.
Well, it does come. You what did was it Beckett who said it's hard enough to write these things without having to talk about them too? Well, it's okay to talk about them if you want to sell copies,
Yeah, I mean, he
as we
was
are doing now. Thank you very much.
yeah, in fact, indeed, in fact, that's the whole purpose. My whole raison d'être.
Well, you've got a book on Terry Malick you're still pushing. I'm pushing Billy Friedkin. We're doing the best we can to make people aware of our craft, which is to provide insight into the film works. We're crossing the media, if you will. We're doing the worst thing possible. We're taking visuals and making words out of them. But I think you have the talent for it, and I pray that I do.
Oh, absolutely. You kidding me? No, I'm not even going to dignify that with a response. So let's talk a little bit about William Friedkin and that first viewing that you had of The Exorcist. I mean,
My first experience with The Exorcist was audio because I was waiting in the damn lobby and I couldn't go in and see the movie. Whenever anything happened, I'd rush in and by then it was over, you see. But it was the next day I stood in the back of the theater because it was sold out for week after week and finally saw the film. I had read the book first, so nothing
mm,
surprised me, but I was pleased by watching the craft. And yes, I turned away during some of the gore.
mm.
People listening to this will surely have seen The Exorcist by now, and if you haven't, 52 years after the fact, no spoilers. But there the scene where people supposedly got sick and ran out of the theater. Can you guess what that scene was?
Now I know because you
That's
mentioned it
not
in the
rhetorical.
book.
Tell me, John. Yeah, okay. Well, it wasn't the head spinning scene. It wasn't the vomit scene. It was the medical scene where Reagan is given an arteriogram, where they stick a needle in an artery in her throat. The medical reality of it sent people running up the aisles. And the irony of that is that it was men who ran up the aisles more than women. And Bill Blatty and others have suggested this is because women who go through the pain of childbirth and who are responsible really for raising children can withstand the pain of a child in danger. But the husbands couldn't.
Yeah, because they absent themselves from it normally, so it doesn't they don't have the practice that women have, perhaps.
No, they're the ones who ran out of the theater and made a Technicolor yawn on my carpet.
Did you get a lot of vomiting then, like properly in the.
Well, in the first run theater, sure,
Mm.
because it was not just the film itself, but the film ran 2 hours and 1 minute or something, and you have people in line waiting for the next show. And so they would see people coming out with their faces ashen, waiting in line for themselves to go in, like an amusement park ride where people come off the roller coaster dizzy. That was the wonderful thing that happened with the excitement of a sold out house. I mean, it really was sold out. It was a twin theater where it opened in Boston, and on the other screen was The Sting. And Universal Pictures forever said, we killed The Sting because of people lining up to see The Exorcist. The people for The Sting couldn't buy tickets.
Oh my God, what a day to be alive when the two choices are The Sting and The Exorcist. It's an
Look,
embarrassment of riches.
we look back nostalgically at a certain period, but in fact, the middle 70s were the last great era of American filmmaking.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many great. I mean, you at the moment, I'm always sort of pitching articles to magazines, and one of the if the release schedule is up and there's not much on, as January there doesn't tend to be that much showing.
Mm.
The trick is always to go on Wikipedia and look at 1966 in film, 1976 in film, and look for any anniversaries coming up that you can write about.
Oh,
And
yes. I'm convinced this is why critics write their 10 best lists because there's nothing happening in late December and January, and they have to justify their salary somehow, so they fill it with 10 best lists.
absolutely, you're absolutely
I'm a
right. And
cynic. I'm a cynic, John.
well, we've got you have to be when you get to a certain stage. But a cheerful cynic, I hope.
Oh, absolutely. I have baby ducks and unicorns all over the place.
So you saw The Exorcist, and of course, prior to that, he'd already had the French Connection as his big sort of breakout
Mm.
film. I mean, he'd made The Birthday Party. He'd made the film that you sort
You
of
made the night they raided Minsky's and the boys in
exactly.
the band. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I had seen them all because that's what you did back then. Yeah. I ran into a sneak preview of the birthday party. I had no idea they were going to show that instead of the film I'd paid to see and
Mm.
was mesmerized because it was, it's a very contained play anyway, and it was just dynamic as hell. Plus with Robert Shaw and people like that, you're not going to go wrong. Night They Raided Minsky's, I rather liked because I knew the publicist for United Artists in Boston, and so he invited me to a screening of it. Apparently, Billy didn't like the film, but I certainly did. But the French Connection, you're right, was the one that riveted everybody. Not only the chase scene, but the verisimilitude and the veracity of the whole thing, and it still rings true.
And massively influential as well. There's so much television and so much, you have all those cop shows, all that just that look, even the when you had something like NYPD Blue and the sort of shaky cam that
Hmm.
begins to become gives it that documentary feel. Must sort of there must be a thin blue line that you can spool back to the French Connection. See what I did there?
Certainly, yes, yes. For a major studio, of course. Owen Roizman was just remarkable in that film. But remember, Billy had come out of documentaries in Chicago with handheld
Mm.
cameras, where the lightweight 60 millimeter cameras were then new, the recording cameras. And so instead of having to use a 60 millimeter Mitchell, which weighs as much as a car, he was able to use Arriflexes and especially Arri BLs and Blim cameras when he had Wilmer Butler, who later used the name Bill Butler and photographed Jaws, among other films. So they were collaborators in Chicago, and Billy took that style when he made The French Connection, which is essentially a police procedural. Audiences love watching how things are done, a procedural with massive set pieces, and it was just a remarkable film and still is.
I think that's one of the things that I love about the French Connection, particularly, is, and to some degree, that this goes over into The Exorcist, is that idea that you follow people doing a certain task, and there's not
Hmm.
that much extraneous to that. You don't have much. Roy Schneider's character, you don't go into sort of his backstory or anything. It's just Gene Hackman has a bit of an affair, fling at one point, a one
Right.
night stand, but there's nothing else. It's just them doing their job, and that's it, really. Which I kind of get from your book is more or less exactly what the guys who the film is based on were like. They just arrested people, and that's where they got their jollies.
That's true. There was a scene that was cut of Marcel Boussouffi, who was one of the assassins, having an S&M relationship, and that was well, knowing Billy, he probably shot it because he would have fun shooting it and never intended it for the film. But it's available on special features on many of the discs. But yeah, you're right. Cut to the chase. Well, this is what Howard Hawks would always do. Howard Hawks valued people doing their jobs and doing their jobs well. And that's certainly what Sonny Grosso and Eddie Egan did in real life that led to the largest drug bust in American history. You know, I worked with Sonny Grosso.
No, I didn't know
Was
that.
fortunate. I guess it isn't in the book, but years later, I sold with my partner Gail Kirschenbaum a program to HBO about the American Parole Board system. It's since been ripped off by everybody else, but we had it first. And Sonny and his partner Larry Jacobson were the executive producers of it. And Sonny, oh, this is a great story. It is. It's not about Billy, but it's a great story about Sonny. Sonny was a cop. Once you're a cop, you're always a cop. So we're editing one night late in New York City, and they had offices on Third Avenue and on the East Side. And he said, "Let's get some macaroni." So we
Mm.
go up to an Italian restaurant, and I know it's a good restaurant because they have a picture of Frank Sinatra on the wall. And we're shown to the table, but before we get to the table, Sonny goes over to speak to a couple of guys at another table, and I know enough of etiquette not to sit at Sonny's table unless he's there. He's talking to the guys and talking to the guys, and he comes over and he sits with his back to the wall because he was a cop. And he also, at one point, reached down and showed me his ankle holster where he carried a snub nose. That's in addition to the one he carried on his chest. And we're talking. He's telling some great stories because he was a magnificent storyteller. And I said, Sonny, did you ever bump into anybody that you sent up to the penitentiary? Ever bump into them afterwards? He points to the guys over the table and said, yeah, those guys. I said, what? He said, yeah, four guys. He said, they're made men, and the agreement in their parole is that they're not supposed to be talking to each other ever. But I'm not going to bust them at dinner. And they
Mm.
eventually paid their bill and left. But that's Sonny. He was a remarkable man. When his partner Eddie died of cancer, the city and the police force weren't going to do anything. So Sonny himself arranged for a hero's funeral.
Mm. Mm.
There's one surviving cop from who busted the French Connection. This is Randy Jurgensen, who has just turned 91. He's in New York and is supervising awards, and there's a documentary being made about Randy. Again, these are absolutely remarkable people. Whatever you say about cops, these guys absolutely kept the peace and put their lives on the line. So that's my editorializing. But that's what Billy fell in love with. Billy was enamored of policemen. He had a cop in his family, a corrupt one as it turned out, but he had a cop in his family. He loved watching police do what they do. He'd go on ride-alongs, he'd hang around with them, he'd meet the guys that they would bust. I mean, this Billy was a street kid, and he brought that street kid mentality to his movies. And that's why the French Connection survives as a great, great experience.
I was wondering as I was reading your book, I was wondering about how important it is that Billy is from Chicago, that he isn't, he isn't growing up near the film community, either on the West or the East Coast. Because even in New York, you would have people around you. There would be a film school, close by. Do you
Mhm.
think that that gives him that sort of outside, that contributes to the outsider status that he had?
Billy was a street kid growing up in Chicago under not terribly magnificent circumstances. He
Mm.
was an autodidact, finished high school barely, and learned everything by hanging around with people, some of the great lawyers, some of the great scholars, and he was part of that retinue, if you will. The thing about Chicago, which I adore as a city, is it's far enough away from New York that it doesn't give a shit about New York. It has its own lore, its own history, which is all over the map, and they have nothing to prove. The big-shouldered city, the windy city, that's Chicago for you. And I think Billy picked up that attitude of, well, I can take it, and he brought that to his movies. He did live in New York as well as Los Angeles at a certain point because you have to go there for the meetings. but he always loved Chicago.
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of like later on in his career as well. He becomes a huge champion of Tracy Letts, who's obviously,
Mm.
writing from Chicago as well. The playwright and actor who we've seen recently in
Hmm.
House of Dynamite. He's someone he's
Yeah,
like one of those secret people who, whenever he shows up in a film, it's like, oh, they've just put a bit of Tabasco in this movie. It's
that's
amazing.
true. He's wonderful at that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. When we go to The Exorcist, I also get this feeling as well that Billy turns up in sort of with the Catholic Church and with this milieu of the horror film. It's almost like he has the same thing with cops, where he wants to go on ride-alongs with priests. He wants to go into the the Catholicism, and he wants to get into it. He wants to see it from the inside out rather than just observe it and film cliches.
Billy's father died young. His mother, Ray, was really the guiding force in his life. And I think Billy grew up without role models. So he acquired them sort of like tofu. Whatever milieu he was involved with, he picked up. I think he likes the mumbo jumbo of, in particular, Catholicism. I think Louis B. Mayer once said why there are not films about rabbis, why there are films about priests. Instead, he said, rabbis aren't interesting. Priests have all that stuff. I think Billy kind of picked that up too. What was, of course, part of the texture of The Exorcist was William Peter Blatty, who was a
Mm.
Jesuit scholar, went to Georgetown University, and absolutely, in fact, I'm in touch with his son Michael. And today, as we record this, the 7th of January is William Peter Blatty's birthday, by the way. But he was steeped in the church, and of course, that infuses every moment of The Exorcist. There was one point when Billy was investigating churches, and he was so moved by the service that he went up and took communion. And when he told that to Blatty, Blatty was aghast by saying, "Do you realize you're not baptized? That's blasphemy." But in his later years, Billy actually did accept Jesus as his personal savior, and he decided to be buried in the church, or married in the church, certainly, with Sherry Lansing, who was Jewish, which kind of surprised her because I don't believe she heard about it until they were at the ceremony. But that's what he wanted, and he believed in angels, and he had various religious relics near his bedside, and for a guy who got a bar mitzvah, it's kind of a long road.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was brought up as a Catholic. My mum's Irish, and we, I always remember having discussions with the other altar boys where we were very sniffy about Anglicans. It's sort of like, why even bother if you're not, if the priests are gonna marry and you're not gonna wear proper vestments, what's the point? That's all the stuff is the point of Catholicism.
It's true. Well, I've been to a lot of Catholic services. They're absolutely stunning services. Now that they're in English, although I do speak a smattering of Latin just to get in trouble. But they're wonderful. All religious services in their way are wonderful if you're into it, which I'm not.
Mm,
But Billy was,
mm.
especially as he went on. We never spoke about it, oddly enough. It was just something that I think he acquired in later years.
And so with The Exorcist, he has this, it's strange because I do see the French Connection and The Exorcist quite close in terms of style and the realism and the
Mhm.
attitude that he sort of brings to them, despite there being different genres. And then you get Sorcerer, which is often portrayed retrospectively as this, hubris and all, what have you. But I think and you say in the book as well, it's just one of the best films to come out of the 70s.
It is, and I think Billy's whole thing is he wants to put you there. The handheld camera is part of that, but also choosing the right shots. He knows exactly where to put it so that you feel that you're part of the scene. Now, all great directors and cinematographers do this, as well as create an environment whereby the actors can behave like their characters. I mean, you could go back to John Ford, who would manipulate people like a harp so that they gave the performances that he wanted, not as themselves, but as the roles they were playing. And Billy was, of course, the same way by making the Roy Scheider characters or the others in Sorcerer actually feel the danger. Now, part of that was because the environment sucked and they had to go through the rainstorms and the explosions and the bridges and all that. But that's the verisimilitude that he wanted, and it certainly comes across on the screen. But Billy wants the audience to feel that too, and the audience in 1977 did not want to feel Sorcerer. Many of us did, but most of them didn't, and it took decades to be able to pry the film out of mystery and bring it back. And now, of course, it's considered his best film.
I love the quote from Robert Mitchum, one of the people who was in the casting sort of process, and he was like, "I don't need to go to South America to fall out of a truck."
Well, yeah, Mitchum was. Sometime I'll tell you dealing with Mitchum. The film, as you know, was originally conceived for Steve McQueen,
Right.
who was married to Ally McGraw at the time and didn't want to leave the country long enough to make the movie, probably for a number of reasons. So they gave it to Roy Scheider, and it was Waylon Green, the screenwriter's opinion, that Scheider needed more dialogue.
Mm, mm.
Scheider, I think, was a better actor than Steve McQueen, but he wasn't as charismatic, and that was one of the things I think that hurt Source.
Yeah, McQueen could do a lot with a look
Mm.
that Scheider, probably was a more verbal actor than McQueen.
Yeah, plus you can believe Steve McQueen behind the wheel of a car.
True. True, absolutely. Yeah, if you get him near any sort of mechanical motor, he begins to
Right.
shine, he begins to become
Yes.
iconic. And also, I mean, McQueen had that thing of like with Papillon, which is a very downbeat movie that he could
Hmm.
make a downbeat movie and yet and sell it to audiences where I don't think Scheider in this case could.
It's complicated. I remember
Mm.
reading when a film called Still of the Night, which was filmed under the title Stab, came out. That's where Roy Scheider is menaced by Meryl Streep. It's a very unseen film. Robert Benton did it. And the criticism was Roy Scheider as a victim? This man just killed Jaws. But and he was a fabulous actor. I think he had to have better choice of roles. I don't
Yeah,
think he can get along very well during the film, whatever.
yeah. I mean, he's got so many great when you look at his resume, there are so many great movies in there, but as you say, they're kind of widely spaced. There's from the Naked Lunch right at the end to what further down, all that
Hmm.
jazz. With Sorcerer, of course, you have to some degree Friedkin paying a debt to Clouseau in remaking Wages of Fear. What was that? Uh, was that am I framing that correctly? That he was repaying a debt, or was it just that I just want to make an action movie and this is a really good way of doing it? This is a really good concept.
I don't know his reasons for choosing that. When he bumped into Waylon Green on the back lot, he said, "I want you to make a movie with me." And he described roughly what it was. And Green said, "Well, it's either Wages of Fear or At Play in the Fields of the Lord," which
Mm,
eventually was made, I think, by Milos Forman. I may be wrong about that, but Waylon Green was involved. Wages of Fear is a highly political film. Sorcerer is not really. I mean, the
mm,
oil companies, yes, but not so much. And he had trouble remaking it because of the droit moral situation in France, where he had to get permissions from not only the estate of the filmmaker, but also the estate of the author of the book. And they managed to work that out. Interestingly, there is a pirated version.
Nobody does selling better than Shopify. Shopify is the home of the number one checkout on the planet. And the not so secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts go abandoned and way more sales going through. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Skims uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period for 3 months at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
Of Sorcerer going around. I think you can find it on YouTube, called The Wages of Fear, which it was the European re-edit without authorization. Somebody has re-edited Sorcerer into The Wages of Fear, making it entirely linear.
Mm.
which was a very, or rather, I'm sorry, making it nonlinear, which was a way to go. But it's worthless except to say that you've seen it. But I don't know really why Billy made that film. When I did the book, he was still smarting from it. It was 11 years afterwards, and he wrote me the most depressing letter. Actually, when Sorcerer died in 77, the most depressing letter from France, where he was then married to Jean Moreau. How anybody could be depressed being married to Jean Moreau, I'll never understand, but he was. And he said the grosses are lower than whale shit, and it's just disheartening. And a very, very painful letter. And eventually it came back through entirely his efforts and those of Sherry, of course.
Yeah, yeah, I was fortunate enough to see it when it was reshown at the Venice Film Festival with William Friedkin in attendance, and it was great because it was on the occasion of giving him his Lifetime Achievement Award, the Golden Lion for Lifetime
Great.
Achievement. And as he was accepting the award, of course, he gave a little speech before the showing of the film. This is like 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the Lido, and he starts in typical William Friedkin fashion to spin a yarn. And after about 35 minutes, the artistic director of the festival has to say to him, "I'm really sorry, Mr. Friedkin, but we have to get the film on. Otherwise, the rest of the program of the evening is going to be
Yeah.
all out of kilter." But I'd been to several press conferences because I was there when he showed Killer Joe as well at
Yeah.
Venice. And I was there when he showed the documentary, The Father Amor and the Devil, I think it was called.
Hmm.
The
Yes,
documentary about,
The Devil and Father Remorse.
yes, exactly. And
Yes.
every press conference was like an amazing, it was like an audience with, it was a sort of a storytelling, yeah, extravaganza. And, literally people wiping tears. No journalist ever asking a question because the answer was so long from the first question. You didn't, that was the whole of the press conference. But nobody
Well, I
cared
didn't
because
have
it was
that.
so good.
But yeah, he's Billy is as entertaining or even more so than any of his films. He is
Mm.
such a gifted storyteller and he can read the audience. Well, perhaps not at Venice for 35 minutes, but he can usually read the audience to know exactly how to play them because he's just a magnificent storyteller. Again, the oral tradition is important for those who grew up in Chicago and those who live on the streets, whether they're surfers or filmmakers, they have to know the stories that they're telling. And Billy is certainly the master of that. When I interviewed him endlessly, partly for prearranged interviews, partly for quick phone conversations, or just, going to lunch in the course of doing the book, he always stuck to this subject. He didn't go off on these other stories. But I'm also a terribly aggressive and sometimes rude interviewer. If somebody tells me a story that I've heard before from them, I'll say, "You told me that." If they're telling me a story they've told someone else, I said, "Yes, I already have that story." Not only to save time, but because a lot of the times people who do a lot of interviews, and I may have become one of them, have six stock stories they have for every movie.
Mm.
And you got to get them past the first half hour to
Mm.
get into the really good stuff. And I'm sure you've found that out because we've already been speaking so long now that I'm into new territory. You must have found that out as an interviewer and being interviewed that, the first couple of questions are just, you've heard them before.
Yeah, absolutely. And then sometimes if I know I have limited time as well, that I haven't got an open-ended interview, I have to actually say right at the very beginning, there are three things I need from this interview. And I'll list them. I'll say, I need you to say this, this, and this, and then we can talk. I
Good.
need you to say something about the award you're receiving this evening, something about you being in this city today, and your new film, and then we can start talking properly. And that way
Good for you.
they sort of say they kind of relax. They say, "Okay, I can tell you, yeah, I'm really flattered to receive this reward, and I'll take it as a challenge to do better work, and blah blah blah." And they'll do the bump, and then we can actually have a conversation, and that will always be more fruitful.
Well, you're the director. You see how that works? Just most people will respond as asked. The old joke they say, to get material, you treat the famous people like they're ordinary and the ordinary people like they're famous. And famous people who've been interviewed to death do need direction. They have to be told, here's what we want to talk about. And I'm happy that you're able to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've learned from some of the best. I have to say, it's not. It's come along the way, which I'm very grateful for. One thing that I noticed in the book, and one sort of myth that the book for me dispelled, was that idea that yes, Sorcerer, I had previously thought had sent him into the wilderness, but in reality, at least if I've understood it correctly, he was getting no end of work and offers coming, after Sorcerer. It wasn't like, I mean, yeah, he had fallen from grace in the sense that he was no longer necessarily commanding a huge budget and he could do anything. He could have the pick of anything. But as far as working as a director was concerned, he did a series of films straight afterwards.
Hmm. Certainly, he didn't have the same kind of control, but he was an Oscar winner. He'd made two mammoth hits in a row. He didn't suddenly get stupid. Nobody ever said Sorcerer was a bad film. They just said it wasn't successful. And I think that's one of the things that drove him. Plus, he was still very well connected. He had very good agents and was able to get his sense of films. But they didn't all succeed after that. And making the TV movie, the Cat Squad, and then its sequel, was partly an arrangement with NBC and partly an arrangement with Gerald Pettivich, who had, of course, written To Live and Die in L.A., the book, which is, again, I think his fourth great film, to create a franchise and get money coming in, even if he himself didn't keep on directing them. So there was a certain amount of financial manipulation there. The Cat Squad movies are okay.
Mm.
They weren't budgeted to the extent that he could do a lot with them, but they did create a wonderful sense. And that is when I really hung around the set and watched his methodology. Although I'd seen the Brinks Job in other places too, but he was indefatigable. Nothing ever stopped him. But he didn't have the same power for the rest of his career.
What was that like seeing him direct? What was his methodology? What was his demeanor working with actors and working with crew?
The real directing is in the casting, and everybody will tell you that. Once people show up on the set and know what they're doing, the director's job is to keep the mood and make sure the camera's aiming in the right direction. There was one scene where it involved putting cream cheese on a bagel in a breakfast scene. The movie, well, the scene was of no real importance, but it was just something that you did. They needed business, and they had to keep on shooting it because of various technical problems and blocking. And it was a very small location in an actual apartment. And the poor prop guy had to keep on refilling the cream cheese container and smoothing it out so it looked new. Now, this is very small, but it's important because you have to create a scene as if it's the first time any of the characters is doing it. And at some point, somebody complained about it, and Billy said, "This is not a scene about cream cheese." Now, that seems silly, but it broke the mood and made things very funny all of a sudden. So he realized that people were getting so concerned about the technique of what was going wrong, they had to have a laugh. And it's just as minor as that. If you're there, it's very important. When he was shooting the Brinks Job, there was a scene which they cut out of the movie, which shows the people of Tony Pino's gang, Alan Gurwitz and Peter Falk especially. They go into the Brinks garage, which is not locked, and they have to crawl along the ground in case there's anybody watching. It's a tiny scene, but it took half a day to shoot it. They eventually cut it out because it didn't forward the story. But Billy was having fun making these actors crawl along the floor. I thought that was kind of fun. I don't know if the actors did. There's little things like that that just create a director's personality. I know it doesn't sound earth-shaking, but in fact, when you make a movie, out of the thousands of camera setups you have to use, it's only the aggregate that's important, not each individual one. And the director has to keep the mood constant. Otherwise, they don't cut together. It's a long
Bill,
answer, and I'm terribly sorry if I wasn't exciting enough.
no, it was a really interesting answer. It reminded me of Michael Shannon in an interview talking about Bug and how he had this fearsome reputation. He'd heard about Friedkin having this fearsome reputation with actors and with and losing his temper and being impatient and whatnot. And he said, no, no, he was actually very, he's quite grandfatherly and he'd very much chilled at this point. And what he liked doing was every now and again he would straighten up his posture and his trousers would fall down. And he would do that occasionally
Oh,
to sort of like, whenever there was tension on set, it would be his way of saying, okay, everybody relax. We're just making a movie.
yeah, Billy wore his trousers pretty much up to his nipples. I never understood that, but it's true.
It's like
He,
a homage to
yeah.
Humphrey Bogart, perhaps.
Well, but that's the thing. You see, you could never quite know where he was going. Now, mind you, he did slug a priest, so he did have that in him. This was because Bill Malley, who was a real priest, wasn't able to get the emotions proper for the giving of the last rites to Father Karras at the end of The Exorcist. And Bill Malley was not a practiced actor. And after shooting and shooting and shooting at 3 in the morning at 0 degrees, Friedkin said, "Bill, do you trust me?" And Father O'Malley said, "Yes." And Billy said, "Okay." And he slugged him and said, "Roll him." And the tears you see as Malley is giving the last rites to Karras are real tears from the cold and also from the shock of Billy. And they then hugged afterwards, and Malley understood. But you sometimes have to do that if you got a crew waiting around, you're freezing your pills off.
Absolutely. But the absolute confidence as well in this will get this reaction rather than I mean, there could be an alternate version of that story where he does it and the guy just doesn't get the reaction or loses his temper or something.
I love the idea that Billy forgave a priest rather than having a priest forgive Billy. But that's another story.
Let's go back a little bit to Live and Die in L.A., which, as you say,
Hmm.
it's one of his masterpieces. It's a standout movie
Yes.
in his filmography. Let's talk a little bit about that again. Sort of returning to the policier genre, back to the French Connection, but with an L.A. A different coast this time, and
Hmm.
also using, and this is a really interesting point you make in the book, using casting, deliberately casting unknowns, or at that point unknowns.
That's right. William Peterson, excuse me, who later did the CSI series, and John Pankow were Chicago actors from the Remains Drama Society. Went back to Chicago and cast To Live and Die in LA because he wanted the audience not to be that invested in them. But of course, remember Roy Scheider and Gene Hackman were not that well known when he made The French Connection either. So Peterson and Pankow made played the Secret Service guys. And again, from a book and a script by Gerald Pedovich, who was ex-Secret Service, shows them chasing down a counterfeiter played by Willem Dafoe in a very early role too.
Mm.
And I'm fortunate that both Dafoe and Peterson gave me generous interviews at the very start of the book. And that set the whole stage, talking about Billy and how they were both stunned that they weren't well-known movie stars, and yet here's this guy coming out and said, "Okay, you're hired," and how they broke all the rules. How there's a scene set at an airport where Peterson and Pankow have to go chasing after someone who they believe is a counterfeiter and has committed violence, and they have to go through the screening process at the airport, and they're talking with the airport people. The location manager is saying, "Yes, here's how we have to show ID, and here's how we have to go through the gate because we don't want to disrupt everything." And Billy said, "Oh yeah." And he said, "Action." And he just had the actors run right through security, and the real guards are chasing them along with the guards in the movie because Billy said, "We're trying to get this scene and we want to get excitement." So the sirens are going off, and it's real chaos, and it was real chaos. And that's again the verisimilitude that Friedkin likes to throw in his films. It's a nasty, nasty movie. I hope people see it, but the hero is killed toward the end of the film, and the sub-hero has to take over, and he's killed with a shot to the face. And Billy
Mm.
said, "People aren't killed with a shot to the chest. In real life, they're killed in the groin or they're killed in the face." And that's how they did it. And Billy himself is the one who fired off the ketchup into William Peterson's face for a
Jeez.
momentary shot that really sets the whole thing.
Oh, it's
And
so brutal.
it's oh well, it is. They're chasing somebody who's violent, who's a counterfeiter. And we by the way we learn in the film how to make counterfeit money, so it isn't a total loss.
And you point out in the book as well that there's an element of Friedkin, the artist, really connecting to the Willem Dafoe character. This is someone who's meticulous, is someone who there's an admiration
Mhm.
to the criminal as much as there is to the law enforcement officers chasing the criminal.
This goes back to Howard Hawks. You have to be fascinated with people doing a job and doing it well. I think everybody likes to watch things being made. That's why television series exist too. Uh, there was a series here in America called How It's Made on Discovery, which is nothing more than taking pictures of products being turned out on assembly lines. Uh, Kids like to watch things done, whether it's watching recipes come into food or watching Daddy fixing the car. We are fascinated by seeing how things function, and a good director knows when to put those into a movie, but not to take them too long.
It's a sprinkling of that in it to get as part of the pleasure. It's like Coppola adding a recipe to every one of his movies. So, yeah.
Right. Or watching Gene Hackman take apart his house in the conversation. You want to watch people do things with a purpose, not just tinker, but have a purpose to do it.
Yeah, an end point that they're heading towards. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Where do you put Friedkin now? So he when you finish the book, he has a fair few films to go,
Oh
and
yeah, what half as many? Sure. Yeah.
yeah, and how would you judge that latter half of his career then?
He was splitting his career with other endeavors,
Mm,
such as directing Grand Opera and again doing some television. But he didn't lose his way. He just had different interests. He Michael Ritchie once said you make the films they let you make. And I think Billy was at that point too. He had an arrangement with Paramount Pictures where he made quite a number of films from Blue Chips. I think he did Hunted. I'm not sure anymore. Um, at the time, he was married to Sherry Lansing, who ran Paramount Pictures. And people made some snide comments. But in fact, Jonathan Dolgan, who was heading the company above Sherry, had a very, very clear relationship that Sherry could have nothing to do with anything that Billy was doing, and vice versa. So Billy was entirely insulated. And there was no hanky-panky at all. He had
mm.
an arrangement with Paramount. He made movies there. Where he could dig up money, he would dig up money. But it was the changing scene of movies more than anything else. You no longer had the slam bang films that William Friedkin was famous for. You had either big blockbusters that no really great director wanted to get involved in at that point, and you had little films. So he made Killer Joe, he made Bug, he wound up making the K Mutiny Court Martial and scripted it himself as his last film. He made The
Yeah.
Guardian, which was unfortunate. That was for Universal, but that was he took over for someone else, and it was just a mess. There's a
It's-
wonderful book, by the way, I want to point out. Thomas Claggett wrote another book about William Friedkin. Uh, he didn't know I was writing mine, and I didn't know he was writing his, and Billy kept it that way. But Thomas brought out a revised version which has all of Friedkin's films in it. It's called William Friedkin: Forms of Aberration. Oh God, I'm going to mess up the title, but it's available from Amazon. Claggett, Clagett. Tom and I became friends, and it's a remarkable book that does, as you did with the Terrence Malick book, analyzes every film in a granular way, and he's right on target for every one of them, as you were.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I will put that in the show notes as well, so people can.
I'll send you a link.
Yes, brilliant, and I
Yeah.
can people can click on that and get themselves a copy of that as well as your own book, obviously. Yeah, no, I saw the Kane Mutiny court martial again at Venice. I think, if I remember rightly, William had died a couple of months before it premiered, a few months before it
Yeah.
premiered.
Yes, he did. He delivered the cut, and that was it.
Yeah, yeah. But I thought it was a stunning film. Jason Clarke is one of these actors. Again, I mean, there are people like Michael Shannon in Bug,
Mhm.
or Matthew McConaughey when he does Killer Joe. That's kind of the beginning of the famed reconnaissance. But
Mhm. That's great.
it was the
Didn't know that.
yeah, it was the moment where
Yeah.
people suddenly went, "Hang on, is this Matthew McConaughey from all of those rom-coms where he's leaning against Kate Hudson? Is this the same actor? Is
Well,
this,
he purposely turned down rom-coms, no matter how the money was, because he wanted to put his career back on track. Yeah, Billy cast his films very, very well.
Mm,
Because, and this is something I've discussed with many people, the star of a William Friedkin film has to be William Friedkin.
mm.
If you look at it that way, you'll see why he made his casting decisions.
And Michael Shannon said in when he was casting Bug, he said that originally he'd gone to the studio and he'd said, Friedkin went to the studio and said, "I want the entire cast of the show," and they said, "No, no, 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 we're going to recast it, otherwise we can't give you the money." And he said, "Okay, I'll give you everybody else, but the lead has to be Michael Shannon,"
Mm.
and that's how he got Michael Shannon in the picture,
Ah.
which was his first major, well, his first lead in a motion picture at
Hmm.
that stage.
Billy did the same thing with the boys in the band. Mark Crowley was one of the producers, and they brought the stage cast to the screen. And at first, Billy kind of felt confined by that, but then he realized these actors knew their characters better than anybody did, and he was able to change his style a bit for the film over the stage. But he did that very much, and I think made a stunning version. The Boys in the Band is now coming out from Vinegar Syndrome in a new Blu-ray, a new 4K, for which I was very proud to write one of the liner notes.
Oh, excellent! I look forward to seeing that. Uh, I mean, there's a weird thing I think with the '60s and '70s being such a rich cultural moment that there is this. I always think of it as a sort of Bob Dylan syndrome, where everybody's waiting for the good Bob Dylan album to come back. Through the '80s, you have to keep buying those albums and going, "Nah, it's not this one," until
Mm.
finally something comes out that's kind of. I think there's a lot of artists like Cimino, like to some degree Francis Ford Coppola as well, that they're never going to get those glory days again, because the glory days were partly to do with them and partly to do with the context in which they were creating those works.
Mm. The context, you're absolutely right, because you need a nurturing environment. You need critics that people read. You need audiences that want to see movies for $2 each and not $12 each, or however many pounds it is. You have to have an environment where it's the movie that's important, and they don't call it product. You don't invent a movie so you can sell action figures. You invent a movie so that you can see a movie. And it's all changed. It's taken over 100 years for the American film industry, and by that I include the world film industry, to reduce risk and seduce people into overpaying for tickets. It it used to be that a movie had to make money as a movie. Now the movie can even lose money, but all the ancillaries create the profits. Now that's a draconian way of looking at it, but it used to be that the audience was the important part, and now no, it's the consumer. It's a very big
Mm.
difference, and I think we saw the end of it when the corporation started buying all the studios, starting in the '60s, investing in the '90s.
What filmmakers at the moment do you still sort of hold out hope for, or do you still get to some degree excited that oh God, there's a new film by, it's not Satyricon, it's not Fellini, but this is still going to get me out of the house, and I want to see this in a theater.
Sadly and embarrassingly, I don't see as many films now as I used to see. And that's the factor from having been a movie critic for over 20 years. I simply got burned out. And I
Mm,
don't see many films unless I happen to get a DVD or a Blu-ray of it. So I'm really not the person to ask about that. I, of course, enjoy watching Tarantino's movies because they're fun and because he seems to have fun making them. I enjoy Adam McKay's films, but these are, mainstream filmmakers. There's a former student of mine, Gary Fleeter, who has done some remarkable work, and it varied. I can't even pin down what he does. He's done everything from Kiss the Girls to Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead. I think he's directing a Reacher episode. Um, but I feel personally vested in his career. I I'm really not a good person to ask anymore, and therefore I'm a terrible role model in terms of buying tickets. But having worked in exhibition, publicity, distribution, and as a critic, I really think I paid my dues. I'm just going to sit back and write books.
you could retire from the battleground. You've been on the front line long enough. So what's next in terms of books?
I've just sold a book on Alfred Hitchcock to the University Press of Kentucky. Now, everybody writes books on Alfred Hitchcock. My agent refers to Hitchcock as the Beatles of the film industry. But this one is called The Secret Hitchcock. And while we know that Hitchcock had fantasies about the women in his films, the premise of this book, The Secret Hitchcock, is that Alfred Hitchcock used his two main stars, Cary Grant and James Stewart, to do to the women in his films what he himself could not do. And I'll just leave it at that. That's coming out in October from the University Press of Kentucky.
Oh, that's fascinating. I've just been looking at Marnie again,
Hmm.
because I'm currently working on a biography of Sean Connery, and there's a scene in that where not the sort of more infamous scene, but an early scene where he just starts kissing Marnie during a storm, and the camera goes in so close that it's no longer watching the kiss or recording
Hmm.
the kiss or being a voyeuristic sort of rear window. It's actually participating in the kiss. It's actually, it's as close as a camera gets to being a tongue, I think.
It's true. Well, this was Hitchcock. Look at the scene in Notorious where Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman start on the balcony and go to the door. It's a continuous take. We're there right with them.
Mm.
This is Hitchcock. This is why the man was a bloody genius.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, and crazy in a very normal way. Crazy in a way that's very worrying, I think, in some ways, but also left us masterpieces, indelible masterpieces.
Marnie,
Fine.
yeah, that's interesting. I'm very much looking forward to this book because Marnie is one of those films that alternately I love and don't love when I watch it. There's so much in there. It is so rich. At the same time, there's so many things that just make my spine stand up.
Well, it's that whole rape scene
Hmm.
situation, which isn't filmed as a rape scene, but is very obviously it's kind of
Yeah,
not a non-explicitly, if that's even at all possible. But that's what makes it even creepier. And
yeah,
all the screenwriters kind of, I think he goes through two screenwriters before he finds one who will write it for him because they're kind of saying, I think one of the screenwriters wrote an alternate scene saying,
mm,
actually, we could do it this way, and it wouldn't be a rape. And he was like, no, 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 no. That's the whole, and I think the other screenwriter who ended up being the credited one, whose name escapes me, turned
Jay
round and
Allen, Jay
said,
Preston Allen.
"That's
Yeah,
right, yes."
yeah,
Uh, Turned around and said, "You realize why you got fired? You got fired because you tried to take out the reason he was doing the movie."
yeah.
And that's yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's gonna be good. I think back to the innocence of the 39 Steps, where Madeline Carroll and Robert Donat are handcuffed, and you realize how are they going to go to the bathroom? Which Hitchcock, of course, was famous for saying he doesn't like costume films because he can't imagine the people in them ever going to the bathroom. And I don't know if that's a mechanical or an aesthetic decision, but this is Hitch.
It's one of his obsessions. One of his obsessions. Toilet in every movie, or the sound of a toilet in every movie. It's the
Exactly.
appears in the movie more frequently than he does.
It's true. And it was forbidden for so many years.
Absolutely, Psycho. That another broken taboo.
Right, right.
Final question, Nat. Could you recommend a film book for our listeners?
Other than mine, you mean? He says self-promotingly.
You
Uh,
this whole hour has been a recommendation of your film book.
well, I recommended Thomas Claggett's book.
That's true.
There's a movie book I will get out right here. Mm. By my friend Matthew Asprey Gear, who is also a film teacher. It's called Mosby Confidential, and it is an absolutely intense study of Arthur Penn's film Night Moves, which is one of the great films of the 1970s. Taken with Chinatown and The Long Goodbye, it is the holy trinity of private eye films. And The Mosby Confidential by Matthew Asprey Gear has just riveted me because it is taking a terribly significant film that is not always well known. And really, it lays out the ennui of America from the Kennedy assassination in Vietnam on up to the year it was released, which was 76. It's just remarkable. So that is the book. I'll send you a link to that too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. I also read recently Alan Sharp's novel, the
Oh, yes.
screenwriter who wrote it's kind of a
Yeah.
novelization or a writer's cut of his script.
Hmm. It's a wonderful novelization. Alan, we became friends toward the end of his life. Was a wonderful novelist, and his novelization of Night Moves is far more detailed, and in a sense makes a lot more sense than the movie does. But the movie's supposed to be a little bit obscure.
Mm.
But Alan, I miss him. He was just wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely great
Now,
career.
I can also recommend, by the way, there's, I mean, there's when you get to be a certain point as a film writer, as apparently I have, you start getting books sent to you by your friends who write books. You know, people like Joseph McBride and Patrick McGilligan and Stephen Rebello. These all have books out now, and I'm getting these books, which are just too much to read if I'm trying to write my own. I can recommend all of them. They're just wonderful, wonderful biographers.
Oh, absolutely. No, Patrick
Anyway,
McGilligan we've had for Woody Allen, and Joseph
yeah.
McBride a couple of weeks ago came on for his latest book. I think Joe's come on like maybe three times. We've it's been a guest.
Oh,
Oh,
he's just. I mean, he's hypnotic to listen to him, and not just
absolutely.
about movies, but about assassinations and social change. I mean, he's just such a scholar.
I love his stuff on JFK. It's
Oh,
just I'm not saying I believe it. I'm not saying I'm convinced, but when I'm listening to him, I'm convinced.
well, he's not crazy. He's a
No, no.
great researcher and scholar, and it makes sense.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I know.
I think there's a film in Officer Tippett. I think there's a really good movie, a sort of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, where
Yes. Uh-huh.
the Dallas assassination is coming and you know it's coming, but this is you're following a character who is who's going to lose his life as part of this, but
Yes.
is on the edges, is somehow
Yeah.
involved, but you never quite know how. I just think there's an amazing movie there for someone to write. Maybe
Well,
I'll
there. That's your summer project.
Thank you so much, Nat. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Well, John, I can't tell you how enlightening this has been for me to get to know you a little bit. As you may see in the background, because we're on Zoom, my dog has to be walked, so the timing of our au revoir is perfect. Thank you so very much.